Title working script. The things I called love. Too late before I sat down on the train at Union Station, I checked the exit sign, the red firebox by the door, the space between the seats, and the aisle wide enough to clear if people stopped pretending they knew how to stay calm. The carriage smelled faintly of metal, old fabric, and the burned edge of brake dust. The overhead lights were too white to flatter anybody. Every few seconds, the glass shivered with a low rattle from somewhere under the floor. Fire does that to you. It assigns part of your sight to emergencies for the rest of your life. I was wearing a red dress I would not have worn at 30, or 40, maybe not even 50. Under my coat, I had on a pink blouse my son once said was too bright for me, too noticeable. Too much for a woman who had spent most of her life dressed to soothe other people. Inside my handbag, my fingers found my wedding ring. I do not wear it anymore. I carry it because some objects stop being jewelry and become evidence. Across from me, a woman in running shoes was trying to unzip a child's jacket without waking him. Two college boys stood in the vestibule with their backpacks pressed to their knees. A man near the door kept glancing at his phone as if someone on the screen might rescue him from the hour he was currently living. Then the man beside me tried to light a cigarette with a lighter that was already dead. Mid-50s, maybe. Wool coat, good enough to have cost money, though the cuff was gone shiny at the edge. Tired mouth. Clean fingernails. Nicotine stain on the first finger of his right hand. He held the lighter too tightly, like he believed pressure could substitute for method. Click. Nothing. Click. Nothing. Click. The sound was dry and irritating, a small failure with no dignity. "You are not going to scare it into working," I said. He turned, half amused, half annoyed. "You always diagnose strangers." "Only the ones who look busy, so they do not have to look scared." That got a short laugh out of him. Not warm, real enough. Outside the window, platform light slid over his face and pulled away. It left the hollows under his eyes looking deeper than they had a second before. "At my salon in Los Angeles," I said, "I could usually tell who was in trouble before they admitted it. Debt sat in the jaw." Affairs changed the way people touched their phones. Shame made women reapply lipstick too often, and men straighten cuffs no one was looking at. People think a high-end salon is about polish. It is not. It is a room full of people trying to hold a face together until they can get back to the car. He looked at the lighter again. "That obvious repetition tells on people," I said, "especially when they think repetition looks like control." He turned the lighter over once in his hand, then rested it in his palm. "You own the place I built it," I said. "Hair and nails." Women sat in my chair and told me the truth by accident, not usually in words, in shoulders, in hands, in the way they looked into the mirror only after I stepped away. Men came in, pretending they were only there to wait. No one waits in a beauty business without needing something. The train jerked once as it pulled out. A loose bottle rolled somewhere farther down the carriage and tapped lightly against a metal leg. The child across from us sighed in his sleep and dropped his forehead against his mother's coat. "So what does this tell you?" he asked. I looked at the lighter in his hand. "It tells me you think force is more useful than method when you are ashamed." He stared at me for a second, then smiled without much joy. "That sounds personal." "It is," I said. "In 1994, my salon burned. Towels, dryers, chairs, product shelves, appointment books, the little ceramic jar by the register where one client used to leave dollar bills for the shampoo girl. All gone in one night. People talk about insurance after a fire, claims, inventory, square footage. They do not talk enough about what heat does to the nervous system. After that, I checked every stove twice. Then 3 times, I would leave the house, drive 2 blocks, and turn back just to stand in the kitchen and look at the knobs. Not because I had forgotten, because certainty no longer felt like something a person was allowed. He watched me more closely after that. You still do that, yes? You ever stop to? The train picked up speed. Overhead, the light buzzed faintly. Someone opened a can of something sweet and artificial behind us. I could smell it for 3 rows. I was very good at recovery, I said. Too good. People praise you when you keep functioning. They do not always ask what functioning is eating. He slipped the dead lighter into his pocket. And what did it eat? At first, sleep, then softness, then language. He did not interrupt, so I kept going. There is a white uniform in service work, even when the clothes are black. Smile, adjust, absorb, apologize, fix what can be fixed before it becomes visible enough to embarrass the customer. I wore that uniform for years, not on my body, in my nerves. Then I brought it home. I served my husband. I served my child. I served every silence in that house until the role became a reflex, and the reflex started calling itself love. He leaned back and turned his face toward the window. You make it sound like kindness can go bad. It can, I said, especially when it is being used to delay the truth. People think damage arrives with shouting. Sometimes it arrives ironed on time and useful. It remembers birthdays, pays bills, keeps the kitchen clean, knows where everyone left their keys. It can still be feeding something rotten under the floorboards. He said nothing. Good. Then silence is not always avoidance. Sometimes it is the first decent thing a person does in a conversation. A woman named Helen used to come to my salon in Glendale. Camel coat, pearl studs, rings too expensive for how badly she chewed the skin around her thumb. She had remarried late and believed tenderness had finally found her. What found her was paperwork. Her second husband smelled expensive and spoke softly, the way dangerous men sometimes do when they want to sound like relief. I told her once that people drowning in money trouble do not always look frantic. Sometimes they look grateful, like they have found a new shore to drag under with them. She laughed at me. 6 months later, she came in without the rings. There was a pale stripe where one of them had sat for years. She kept touching that bare place while I trimmed her fringe. That was all I needed to know. The house was gone, not in flames, on paper. He turned fully toward me now. You almost did that too. Yes, I said. After my husband died, I told myself I had become practical. What I had actually become was lonely with good manners. That is not the same thing. A man entered my life. Not evil, not extraordinary, just available. The sort of man who could stand in a kitchen and make ordinary loneliness look temporary. He brought forms. He used words like stability and easier years and shared life. Nothing about it felt romantic enough to sound dangerous. One evening I caught myself thinking, maybe it would be nice if someone else checked the stove tonight. That was the doorway. Not because I loved him, because I was tired. Marriage at 65 does not always arrive wearing perfume. Sometimes it arrives in a folder. Did you sign? He asked. No, but I got far enough that my son saw the documents. The window beside us reflected both our faces for a moment, then the tunnel swallowed the glass and turned it black. My own face came back at me faintly in the window, mouth set, posture straight, the old professional arrangement still sitting on top of the damage like good lighting. Leo did not yell. I almost wish he had. Anger would have been easier. He stood by the kitchen counter with one hand flat on the laminate and the other over his mouth like he was trying to keep something from coming out too fast. The folder was open in front of him. I remember the sound the pages made when he turned them. Careful, not dramatic. That was worse. When he looked up, his eyes were already wet. But he was holding himself so tightly, it was as if even his grief had been taught to behave around me. He said, "Mom, 6 months." Not loudly. That was the part that stayed. Not the crying, the control. Then he cried anyway, not over the money, not first. He cried because he saw his mother was willing to hand over the keys to her life to a man she had known half a year while still not knowing how to sit still and let her own son tell the truth in a room without trying to manage what happened next. The train noise filled the space between us. That memory did not flatter me. That is one way I know it was true. People think children miss the quiet failures because there is no shouting. They do not. They feel surrender in the walls, in the pauses, in the way one parent keeps translating reality into something smoother than it is. When Leo was 16, the school called. He had done something mean and stupid, not criminal, not catastrophic, just the kind of small cruelty that asks a parent to choose between peace and truth. I sent money first. I asked questions later. That was my style. Keep it quiet. Keep it moving. Reduce the visible damage. I did that too many times. Not always with cash, sometimes with excuses, sometimes with timing, sometimes with that deadly sentence women use when they do not want heat in the room. He is under a lot of pressure. Maybe he was. That was never the point. The point was that I kept protecting him from friction, then acted surprised when he grew into a man who could not tell the difference between being loved and being managed. My worst failures as a mother were efficient. I packed lunches, paid fees, remembered appointments, and I kept the house orderly enough that disorder had to go underground to survive. People expect maternal failure to look drunk or reckless or absent. Mine wore clean shoes and answered messages promptly. The man beside me rubbed his thumb once over the metal wheel of the lighter still hidden in his pocket. After the fire, I trusted work more than conversation, I said. Work had edges. Work could be finished. A child cannot. A child brings need into the room right when adults are trying to keep themselves from falling apart. So I chose the version of motherhood that looked responsible from across the street. I organized. I softened. I delayed. I fixed around. I called it love. Some of it was love, not all of it. Some of it was fear of heat, fear of naming what was wrong, fear of a scene, fear that if I let conflict into the room, I would lose control of the whole building. So I raised silence. That is not poetry. It is a record. Silence grows fast in a family when one person feeds it with order, money, and a well-managed face. We had meals, we had schedules, we had holidays with decent table settings. We also had a language problem. By the time I wanted to say I love you in a way that cost me something, my tongue had already been trained elsewhere. Of course, no problem. Whatever makes you comfortable. Yes, honey. Yes, sir. Yes, dear customer. A woman can spend decades speaking fluently and still lose the one language her child needed from her. He said quietly, "He hates you." "No," I said. "Hate is hot. This is colder than that. He does not trust what I mean when I speak. That is worse in some ways. Hatred still believes there is something there to fight with." And I looked down at my hands. Old salon hands, good hands, steady. The kind that could build a face back for a wedding, a funeral, a divorce, an interview, an apology. I knew how to prepare a body for almost any public event. What I did not know was how to sit in my own kitchen and let a difficult truth stay ugly long enough to become honest. That was the real failure, not that I did not care. that I kept replacing truth with maintenance and calling myself loving because the house still looked good from the outside. "What about your husband?" he asked. "Caregiving is one of the cleanest ways a woman can disappear," I said. "When my husband got sick, I did what I had always done. I learned the pills, tracked the appointments, organized the drawers, folded fear into routine because routine looked neater. By the end, and I was so tired I could have mistaken collapse for peace. Some of that care was love. Some of it was guilt. Some of it was pride. Competence can become its own addiction. It gives you a mirror where you always look necessary. Did he know? No. I made suffering look smooth. That is a cruel thing to do to people. It teaches them your breaking point is farther away than it is. I took off my sunglasses and rubbed the bridge of my nose. The carriage rocked once over a seam in the track, and the fluorescent light above us trembled. People call women fragile because they have not watched one keep a sick husband medicated, a child fed, and a house presentable while her own body starts negotiating with collapse. I do not think we are fragile. I think we get used past the point where anyone remembers to call it damage. He let out a breath through his nose. Neither of us spoke for a little while. The train began to slow. Brakes pulled low under the floor. Outside, the platform appeared in strips of pale light and dark glass. Someone in the next car laughed too loudly, and the sound came thin through the wall. He took the broken lighter out and looked at it one last time.